All right, joining us now here on the Sharps Report. I just gave you the whole introduction as to who this guest is, but this is somebody who when I started thinking about this podcast, this name popped to mind first and foremost. He's a guy I've looked up to in this business for a long time. He's had a tremendous career, former odds maker, a guy who does his own podcast, which is super successful, called Bet the Board, bettheboardpodcast.com to go find it. He is on Fox Television, Fox Bet Live. He is Todd Fuhrman joining us here on the podcast. Todd, Matt Perrault, thank you for doing this. Welcome him. You're our first guest on this brand new endeavor. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate the time.
You know, it's a lot of pressure, Matt, being the first guest, and with that, such strong words to help describe me as far as the introduction. Hopefully after about 30 or 45 minutes, your expectations in me or your perception doesn't change completely, because they always say the more you get to know people, oftentimes the less you like them. Let's hope that's not true and that won't resonate with the audience today.
I find that very difficult and hard for me to get to. I've watched you do so many cool things, and looking back at your career, you're in the middle of it, obviously, so you're not, towards the end of it. But where you are in the current gambling space, how do you feel things have gone for you since the repeal of PASPA and how everything is turning out in terms of the content in sports gambling?
Honestly, I feel extremely fortunate. I think anybody does that has a chance to do this for a living and talk about sports betting. I joke all the time that my jobs throughout college were always manual labor, and I wasn't exactly built for that particular lifestyle. I tip my hat to everybody that does commit themselves to the crafts and the trades that are out there. But you mentioned PASPA, and I think things have really blossomed a lot faster than any of us anticipated. We knew there was going to be an appetite for increased exposure to sports betting content, but what that was going to look like was anybody's best guess. And even going further back than that, when I had the chance to start doing some gambling content for Fox, I always laughed that the first Friday night that we did a show for what was then Fox Sports Live, we included some NFL content. There was college football. And before I even landed back in Vegas on Saturday morning, the Fox executives kind of said, well, the NFL wasn't exactly fond of us breaking down their games, so we're going to make this a college football only segment. NASCAR has kind of embraced it. But if you'd have told me years ago that we'd be sitting here in 2021, that every league would have official partners, that Major League Baseball would have its own streaming platform to do gambling coverage, I'd have laughed and told you we're absolutely nuts. But it just goes to show that what you and I believed in as kind of ambassadors in the space has finally come home to roost, and we can only hope that content continues to move forward in a positive manner.
I've got a million questions as to where we are here from the media side of it, but I just want to start with the overall health of the industry. How do you feel where we are? Are we okay? Are we heading down a dark path? I mean, where are we with everything you just mentioned about the leagues and how the leagues are approaching sports betting? They were against it for so long. Now they're going forward with it, with both barrels. And we're seeing the NFL already raise the rates when it comes to what they're charging for data. And we're seeing the NBA come on board and say, either you're playing ball with us or you're not going to get our stuff at all. Are we in a good place right now, or are we kind of at a tipping point where we might be going down a dark path?
I don't want to come at it with a pessimistic lean by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also not going to say that we're sitting here and it's all gumdrops and butterflies working in favor of the sports betting space. Because I think when you look around the landscape, there are a number of states that have done things exceptionally well. And Tennessee is one of the first states that comes to mind. They went with the mobile only option and basically opened the floodgates. Hey, look, if you could meet these requirements, you came in, you paid your licensing fee, you're able to operate in a free market and do business the way that you saw best to try and procure customers and give them a good experience. Meanwhile, you look at other states, whether they're state-run lotteries in, the District of Columbia, Montana, Oregon, or what we may ultimately see unfold in New York, there's reason for trepidation, because if you're not going to be able to offer state residents a competitive product that we've grown accustomed to growing up in Nevada, the reality of it is you're not going to completely eliminate, some of the shadier elements that this whole legalization efforts was poised to do. And you talk about the leagues and them working in conjunction with some of the sportsbook operators. I think that's great long-term for business, but what those dynamics of the relationships will look like remains anybody's best guess. And I think you brought up an excellent point talking about the NFL and official data rights and how Genius Sport is trying to pass those costs on to operators. The unfortunate part is that if every step of the food chain, the logistics that go into it continue to escalate costs, well, there's someone that's going to bear the brunt of it. And it's not going to be the leagues. it's not going to be the operators. It's going to get passed down to the consumers. And if we don't have a competitive product or betting markets to take advantage of, it's going to discourage a lot of people that were reluctant to try and get into the space in the first place.
Do you think the average person cares that trickle-down effect may happen? Like, do they care about minus 125 versus minus 110? Does the average gambler give a flip if they're paying 15 cents more on a bet?
I go back and forth all the time, and I would say no. And the reason I would say no, as terrible as it sounds, it's not because, some of the masses just haven't been able to do their homework. They know what they're accustomed to and what they've seen in the past. But I go back to some of my time at Caesars, and it wasn't even in the sports side. We used to run tests when it came to blackjack and try and figure out exactly what players were looking for in the optimal blackjack game. Because was it 3-2? Was that going to be the determining factor? Was it going to be 6-5? And could you have a blackjack variant out there? And it's not something I'm proud of, but as a businessman, you're forced to try and figure out how you can extract the most money from customers while not taking away from their experience. And what we found out through a variety of tests at a number of Caesars properties is that people were more likely to pay a game with bad rules working against what they wanted to try and accomplish if we could offer them lower limits. So for us, we preferred to offer a 6-5 blackjack game with a $10 minimum at the table than offering a $25 minimum with better rules for the player, because we found out that most players were price sensitive above all else. I'd like to think sports bettors will eventually get to that point where they realize, hey, look, beating 11-10 is extremely difficult, let alone what it's got to be if I have to put up $1.25 to make $1 coming back. And I think one of the issues that we all fall into, having worked in the space, is that we look at the echo chamber that's Twitter and think that, oh, this is a massive issue for everybody. But in reality, what? The gambling Twitter community represents 1-2% of folks that are out there. And for the casual bettor that may walk into a casino, wherever it may be across the country, they're not going to really balk at the idea of putting up $12 to win 10 on an NFL game on a Sunday compared to $11 to win 10, because they just don't understand the mathematical implications of those kind of decisions over hundreds and hundreds of trials.
I was going to go there later, but I'll go there now because it's a perfect segue. So David Payne Purnham today had an article out on ESPN Chalk about the bonuses that are given back, the karma committees or the bad beat committees, whatever you want to call them, where a $25 wager gets refunded and the professional who is betting, a dime gets told to go fly a kite. You're not getting anything back when John Rahm withdraws from a golf tournament with COVID-19 when he's leading by 6 strokes. Long term, isn't the idea is to get the player to play more? And the bad beat committee, even though it feels good, it factors right in, or it feeds right into what you're talking about the idea of keeping the player playing.
It's such a double-edged sword in a variety of ways, because I've been on the operator side. And of course, when we just had brick and mortar options at Caesars back in the day, I didn't have to worry about mobile, didn't really have to worry about customer retention. We just had to try and focus on customer service above all else, knowing that we had a captive audience in our properties. And look, when it's 110 degrees in the middle of July, they weren't going to walk across the bridge over Flamingo to the Bellagio to try and save themselves a nickel or a dime when they were betting baseball games. Fast forward to where we are now in a lot of these states that are coming online. And I think the operator is going to do everything they can to try and grab the headlines. And so they're paying for the cost of PR. They're going to weigh their cost benefit analysis and go, you know what, if we refunded, $500,000 in site credit, but we're going to get $2.5 million in media impressions, then it becomes a no-brainer. But I think to your point in the article you reference is, it's going to rub professional bettors the wrong way. The challenge here, and it's something that, sickens me to even say, do most of these operators even care what professional bettors think? Because we may bet significantly larger sums of money, but given the trends that we've seen throughout the industry, there are only a few shops that are willing and eager to try and cater to those bettors that are going to consistently have an edge, where a lot of operators go, you know what, we want the recreational player. We care about the guy that's going to deposit $250 and is going to bet football. And if we can refund him on a $25 bet so he has a good experience, that's what we have to try and do. My biggest fear is that you're going to run into situations from a gaming control standpoint that what defines a bad beat? And when you create some of these arbitrary criteria, are you going to open yourself up to lawsuits or litigation or, hey, look, my starting quarterback got hurt 47 seconds into the game. Why don't I get a refund on that NFL bet? Whereas John Rahm bettors got a refund after he played 54 holes. And so for me, that's the one area that I'd be a little bit apprehensive if I was still working as an operator, more so than, focusing on this from the consumer standpoint.
Where do you come down on the book's ability or the book's right to either A, limit, or B, blacklist and kick out a pro gambler for winning too much?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of kicking out pro bettors in any capacity for that. I think what you can do is be open and transparent with what you're trying to do. And some books are better at it than others in terms of publishing limits, where they'll say, hey, look, this is a market that we know caters to a slightly more sophisticated customer. So if you want to come in and you want to bet WNBA first half, we're not going to give you $20,000 off the street. So for me, what I would like to see, and I think I've written a couple articles about it. I know I try and sound like I'm beating a dead horse. I'd love to see where every sports book had to kind of publish what their limits were. And if they're lower limits, so be it. But every customer, regardless of his or her ability, should be able to get that. So if it's an NFL game and what you want to take is $3,000, hey, that's the book's decision to try and figure out how they want to try and handle things. I don't like this nebulous area that we've all been in. When you log into one of your mobile apps, you put a bet in and you watch that wheel of death going around trying to figure, is my bet going to be accepted? Is it not? How are we going to play this? Let's make a deal in terms of the sportsbook operator trying to come back and go, you know what? You can have half that stake that you were looking for. So if everything was in black and white, work with low limits and people would accept it. I think that's what gets most frustrating for professional bettors is that you could walk in there and one supervisor on a Saturday will give you this. You go in there on the following Saturday to bet college football in the exact same conferences with the same teams, and you may be offered a completely different limit. So I'm never going to be a proponent for kicking people out unless they're doing things that are abusive of the system or they're trying to circumvent, some of the internal controls, whether it's kiosks or a variety of other things. It's an ongoing cat and mouse game. Professional bettors have one job. It's to get down as much money as they want on various markets. And the sports books have a job to try and protect their assets. So they're not going to sit here and get beaten by the same guys over and over. The one thing, though, that does drive me nuts about this space, Matt, is books that claim they'll take all comers and that they'll take such large limits. And if that's not the truth, hey, look, I'm perfectly fine with a business model as long as you want to own it, but don't profess to be something you're not, because all that's going to do is draw negative publicity and create a bad experience for people, because the professional bettors now had to start somewhere, and that $100 bettor that may just be turning 21 may become that professional bettor 10 to 15 years down the road. And if they have a bad experience with an operator, you could potentially lose that business long term.
Todd, tell me if I'm nuts here, because this has been kind of my theory, and it goes back to my days in radio, where in radio, we have to set a number for political advertising. And when you have a number, you have to tell the people, this is the lowest rate we charged anybody for this given year. And the given year, say it's $500 a commercial. Well, the politician gets a right to come in and purchase the advertising, even if it could be $1,000 a spot. They get $500 a spot because you sold it to somebody else for $500. I want to inverse that. And I want to say, look, if you're a book and you took a $500, $1,000 bet from some guy off the street, that number has to be available to everyone, that you cannot discriminate. And you can't say this guy gets X and that guy gets Y. It has to be a level playing field, that you're not able to basically pick and choose what limit each player gets. Could that be done?
I think there's pros and cons to that. I think you do have to start with a baseline, the same way that you walk into a casino. Hey, look, every table game in the casino has a minimum and it has a maximum bet established. I think when it comes to sports, if maximums were well published, that if you came in off the street, worst case scenario, you're able to get 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 based on the sport. Now, I don't want to try and claim that it's all apples to apples. If you want to bet a NASCAR matchup, you're not going to get nearly the same limit you're going to get on betting an NFL playoff game. But if you're published and all of that stuff is there, I think it takes out a lot of that ambiguity. Now, at the same time, hey, look, I work behind the counter at Caesars, and we offered larger limits to some of our house players. There was a gentleman that was able to come in and bet as many NFL games as he wanted for $200,000 a pop. And you do extend those courtesies to folks that are good in that you've worked with over time. And it's not that much different than, the stock market. Now, it's not quite the same because you don't have the same liquidity concerns in the market, but you can't come in and completely overwhelm a market if you're buying penny shares or things along those lines. There are going to be market caps in place, but I think sports, it almost feels like the black box that you don't know what you're getting until you fully get in there. But yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think blacklisting customers or refusing to do business is just doesn't create a good experience for anybody. It doesn't paint the industry in the best light. publish limits, be able to adhere to that. And if you want to extend larger limits to customers, hey, that's your right, because ultimately you want to sell the right product to the right customer at the right price. And no, I don't want to give $100 million to folks that want to bet the NFL draft who have perfect information. But you want to come in and bet the Super Bowl with me, I'm going to take as much money as I possibly can and trust the efficiency of the market.
You mentioned that the $200,000 per game house player, and oftentimes the properties that have that floor to fall back on, also with the sports book, they're the ones that oftentimes are publishing those big wagers, and they're claiming, and they're telling the public, telling the media, telling me, hey, we just took a bet for $500,000 on X. How do you feel about those bets being published? Do you feel like that's a game they're playing with the public, or is that just information that they're sharing because they want the free media?
If I told you, if back in the day, if I would have disclosed that we took $200,000 on a variety of NFL games, I probably would have been looking for a job on Monday, let alone if I took those tickets, blacked out the casino customer number or anything else, and decided to tweet them out. I'm not so sure where this industry trended towards the shock and awe. And maybe it was Floyd Mayweather who decided he wanted to post his own tickets on social media. And I think if a player does it, hey, look, is it a practice that I want to try and employ? Probably not. I don't feel that I want people to see my bank statement and I look at, what I'm betting on games. I don't really want that information getting out there. But when books kind of take that privilege and decide that it's important for them to share that with media outlets or to send out pictures, I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope, because the question I always ask is, what happens if that player is on social media and I happen to see that? And I go to a South Point, I go to an MGM, or I go to DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever the operator may be, I like to think that my privacy is going to be protected in some capacity. And unless I've signed a consent form, I don't want that information getting out there that I bet $50,000 on a money line parlay for X, Y, or Z reasons. And there's a variety of stamp viewpoints that people can take on this topic. But I'm a little bit old school in that if you want to share that information, hey, look, you can do that through your own social channels, but I'm not quite sure it's in the best interest of all of us if the books are sharing this. And I'll go the other extreme as well. The idea of these parlay lottery tickets that are out there on all the social media, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit reckless. And, we talk about responsible gaming being a huge component, trying to promise people that, hey, look, you put up $1 and you can win a parlay that pays 250 to 1. I think we're headed down a slippery slope as far as RG is concerned.
Because it looks like the lottery, right? I mean, if you show a $10 ticket to win,
that's what it is. It's basically a scratcher. It's a sports betting lottery ticket, and we know about problem gaming. We know how many people get in trouble with it. So again, if a player wants to share that, to pound his or her chest that, hey, look, I was able to beat the books, knock yourself out. But I don't think sports betting accounts, especially from the operator standpoint, should really be the ones kind of pushing a little bit of this propaganda, instead focusing more on their offerings and some of the customer service things, that we talked about that I think people find more important as the space matures a little bit.
On your Twitter account, you essentially, I equate you to like a sports gambling Yoda with the information that you show to people. I mean, I share it all the time to my audience on the Daily Juice, and we have a Discord channel, and I can't tell you how many times a week I'm taking things that you're tweeting and I'm putting it in there saying, guys, this is what I'm talking about. This is what you should be learning about. This is why it's important to listen to Todd. But why do you feel like that's important to you? Why do you try to share that information to help either A, win, or B, stay out of trouble?
Well, I think the big part is that I've seen what gambling can do, especially on the problem gambling side, and how it can destroy people's lives. I mean, that's the reality of it. And it shouldn't be understated that there's a portion of the population that's going to get involved in sports betting where their betting is going to control them. And I tell people all the time, 99% of the folks out there are going to see sports betting as a form of recreation. Recreation is best enjoyed when you've allocated your money accordingly and you're perfectly fine with losing it. I mean, if we go to a show or dinner, you don't go, you know what? I could have saved an extra 3% on a tip, and that's going to change the quality of experience I had. No, you put aside $500 or $1,000 or whatever it may be and go, I really enjoyed the experience. Whereas sports betting doesn't quite necessarily have that same connotation. And I think one of the things that you begin to worry about is so much is spent on advertising and marketing, and rightfully so, for books that are trying to turn them into healthy, thriving businesses, that you neglect that smaller portion of folks that don't know where they can turn if they get themselves into trouble. And yes, the legal age for sports bettors is 21, but there are a lot of folks, whether we want to admit it or not, they're going to start betting with corner bookies at a younger age. I mean, I started betting with a guy in junior high school at 14 years old, and at $10 a game or whatever it was, if I lost 50 or $60 working for $4.25 an hour cleaning bathrooms at the pool during the summer, yeah, I was going to be rip shit pissed off, and I was going to be a little bit frustrated with it. So I think it's important while we talk about the upside that's there, and sports betting is a great recreational pursuit that can be enjoyed individually. It can be enjoyed as a part of the community and create camaraderie with your buddies and such. There is that other component that has to be addressed. And I think a lot of times, especially when we see some of these stories that are out there, we're celebrating the mass victories, but we're not talking about the other side of the coin. And if people don't like that I share some of that content, as I know people don't, because they say it comes off, arrogant, this, that, or the other, so be it. It's something that I've held important to me. And I want to make sure that people understand that for as much fun as sports betting is, if you're not careful with it, there are some major pitfalls that you have to try and avoid.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think it's something that has to happen a lot more, to be quite honest, just given the fact that, look, for the Daily Juice podcast, I have bet now 374 consecutive days, whatever it is. And I tell people, look, if you cleaned up my bankroll, my life, my daughter, my wife, my house, nothing changes. Everything is completely the same. And I go on with my life, and I'm embarrassed and mad at myself for blowing my entire bankroll, but nothing changes in my life. And people who I see are people who have reached out to me, and I've had people come at me and be like, do you ever feel responsible that you're pushing content that are going to ruin someone's life? And I'd say, yeah, I do. I am very, cognizant of that idea. I think it's important for all of us who are in the gambling space to recognize that there are people who cannot handle it the same way a bartender has to recognize that a guy at the end of the bar, if he's drunk, don't keep giving him alcohol. Don't let him drive. Call him a cab. I think there's a responsibility. And I've done that with people who have been I reach out to them DM saying, hey, you don't sound like you're having fun. And it's a stupid cliche, but it's true. If it stops being fun, stop doing it. It's supposed to be entertainment. And I feel like you're right in the point that everyone is all about the glitz and the glamour and the wonderful cashing of tickets. But we don't talk about the dark side of sports betting. And look, the more we put this out there, the more problem gamblers is going to be, right?
Yeah, exactly right. As the population of sports bettors grow, that 3 to 5% that are problem gamblers, that number is going to grow as well. It's not as though, oh yes, we're going to have a larger pool of sports bettors, but the amount of people that struggle with gambling addiction or some of the darker sides is going to go down to 1.5%, 2%. That's unfortunately not how some of this works. And it also goes to the content space as well. And that's an area where I'm a little bit concerned because, yes, gambling is fun, but it's a lot different when people are reading articles or listening to podcasts and the people producing content don't hold themselves accountable or responsible, that it may be fun to them. But for some folks that are out there that aren't doing things the right way, it can get themselves into dark avenues and lead to other problems that are out there. And I know the UK has really tried to do a lot more to crack down on it. They're trying to figure out some rules and regulations that are there. And while sports betting in this country is still very much in its infancy, I think it's coming at some point that there'll be avenues for people that you hear some of these ads for the various sports books, that there are numbers out there. And for anybody listening, if they find themselves that really aren't enjoying it, ask a friend, seek help, and make sure you do what you need to put yourself in a better frame of mind. Because Matt, let's not kid ourselves. You and I have done this for a while. Trust me, there are plenty of Saturdays and Sundays during the fall where, yes, it may not impact your ability to keep a roof over your head or put food on the table, but you have those darker thoughts that come in and the level of frustration and everything that's there. And it's human nature. No one wants to lose in any capacity. And when that snowball starts to gain momentum, it can be so dangerous.
It was called the month of June for me of 2021. That's what happened to me in the month of June. I was very happy to see the calendar flip to July and get away from that month of June that I just had. Where do you come down on buying picks, not selling picks, because we know that's a business model and fine, but where do you come down on the person who's buying picks? Smart or not?
It's always going to be an uphill battle. When you're raising your costs in terms of taking money away from your bankroll, you're going to find yourselves in very difficult territory to try and earn that back because the pick seller is going to be able to go on with their business, and you may have run out of your bankroll that's out there. Now, at the same time, there are a couple of services out there, and you do have to do your homework for guys that are proven winners, that are professional bettors, that you're able to get a little bit of an edge. But if you're going there trying to find, your 50,000 star parlay or your game of the year or game of the month, unfortunately, those are marketing gimmicks that are out there and meant to try and get people that are looking for a quick fix. So if you're looking for a consultant or somebody that you think you can lean on that'll be able to help you make money, try and trade emails with them, reach out, develop a rapport, and try and gauge exactly what the general sentiment is. But for the most part, I think, buying picks is a slippery slope, and it's going to be very tough to kind of recoup those costs. But at the same time, there are folks out there that do this for a living that are willing and happy to share that information. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I know everybody wants to go, oh no, anyone who sells picks, they're the scourge of the earth. I don't necessarily feel as strongly on that, but we'll encourage anyone that does want to explore that avenue. You get what you're paying for in life. And if someone wants to charge you, a cut rate price, you may want to leave there scratching your head going, wait, exactly what am I getting? But at the same time, I pay for, all the news publications that come out, their newsletters that are helpful. And I think oftentimes you're better off paying for information than you are just straight up picks.
When Showtime did their show Action, they chose to highlight Vegas Dave. He has now since and gone bought billboards around town. I was driving back from San Diego 2 weeks ago, and in the middle of nowhere, there was a billboard that Vegas Dave had purchased. And I just kind of was like, where am I right now? I thought I was on the planet Mars. Do we see other people get to that level where they're going to be buying billboards in the pick selling market? Not to say how he does it, not whatever, but just someone of that type. Are we going to have more of those types out there that will be out there pushing themselves on mass media?
Oh, 100%. I think when you see the influx of social media and what you can do through Twitter, through TikTok, through Snapchat, whatever social media platforms, he or she who speaks the loudest is going to be able to develop a following before people may know what hit them. Because people are always looking for that get-rich-quick fix. And if someone can sell you a bill of goods, even if it's snake oil, people are going to be pretty quick to buy into it. So you'd hope that through social media, if you seek out names or you're running searches, you're able to try and sniff that out pretty quickly. But I'd be lying if I said that I thought that space was declining in any capacity, because there's always flash, dash, and selling that dream that's going to be attractive for somebody out there.
So I was at the press conference for Conor McGregor's fight against Dustin Poirier, and I'm sitting next to Chad Ochocinco. And he's a guy with 3 million followers on Twitter. I can't know how many million on Instagram, a guy who's in this space now working for a company doing sports betting. And he had put $50K on Conor in the second fight against Dustin Poirier. So he went to the microphone and he asked Conor for a prediction, saying that his company is all going to be backing him. He, again, was placing a large wager on Conor. So was Conor going to make a prediction as to what was going to happen? Now, that's a rarity. That's a former NFL athlete who's a known big gambler. But where's the line? Like, I'm curious, and I'm concerned about the fact that teams and leagues will start to look at me and say, okay, Matt, you might be a media member, but you host a sports gambling radio show. Sorry, I'm not allowing you to come in to cover my event because we don't feel like that's the right credential to give. Is there a line? Is there a separation we have to have between the two with sports gambling media and media?
I think the fight game is always going to be a little bit different. Boxing and UFC have grown on the backs, the blood, sweat, and tears of the odds making and sports betting industry, to be quite frank, because I think when UFC was in its infancy, one of the things that gave it legitimacy was the ability of sports books to hang numbers. You don't worry about the integrity or potential impropriety of a sporting event if you can go out there and bet it. There's a reason that the WWE isn't a bettable event other than offshore for very low limits, but you can bet marquee fights. And I think when you talk about that, you begin to wonder about the scrutiny that, the TikTok and YouTuber fights will continue to draw if sports books actually want to take that. But I think it's a valid concern. When it comes to people asking those things, I always joke, if you're going to ask athletes or coaches how to go about betting, you may as well light your money on fire, because you're not going to get any information. But I do think for folks that are in the sports betting side, there are poignant questions that you can ask that may be a little bit leading. But for any sports journalist that's out there, unless there are strict rules in place, hey, look, if I live in Nevada and I cover a certain sport, or I live in Maryland, I may want to bet games on the side and try and use some of that information. My feeling is that if you're not doing anything illicit and illegal, unless the leagues decide to fully crack down on it, you're putting, your money where your mouth is, and you're trying to back your opinions with a higher level of conviction and confidence that's out there. And the same way that, unfortunately, people are going to do in every type of market that's there. Information is the ultimate commodity. And if you can use it to line your pockets until you have the insider trading that's prevalent in the markets and crackdowns there from governing bodies, I don't think there's any way to stop it in the sports betting space.
What happens when a media company is requiring their person to make picks and requiring them to write a betting podcast or a betting column where they haven't been in the future? It feels like everyone in the media space is now having to adopt some level of language in sports gambling.
Yeah, it gets a little bit to be a slippery slope. The last thing I want is a journalist that's covered a particular sport for 15 years suddenly needing to make picks, not understanding the mathematical implications of their decisions. And I've spoken to people, a couple of years ago, a couple of prominent journalists go, hey, look, I've been offered an opportunity to do a picks column. And I tell people, if you don't have to pick games, why would you want to pick games? I get it's fun and you can do what you need to go, I went 10-2 picking NFL games. But if it's going to somehow impact your credibility in a negative manner, there's no reason to do it. Try and go out there, write about your sports, write about human interest stories, cover the injuries that are there, but don't necessarily make picks because you can do yourself more of a disservice than anything else. And I don't think people realize how hard it is to go out there. And if you want to bet the NFL to win 55% of your bets over the course of a full season, and it's not even that sexy to talk about that. If you go, I bet 100 games, I went 55-45 or 53-47 and made a crumb. That's not going to impress readers of your column. It'll be, doing yourself, like I said, a huge disservice if you try and take yourself out of the comfort zone as a journalist and feel like you fully need to immerse yourself in the gambling space. Now, the counterpoint to that is, do I think it's helpful to learn terminology and understand what all that stuff means? Yes, because I think people are going to look for that from some of their favorite sports writers, that there's a point spread reference in there, that there's an understanding. And the whole thing, if we want to claim that it was a monumental upset, but a team was a 3-point underdog, we have to learn to pump the brakes and at least create a sports parallel to go, okay, you know what? Yes, it may have been an upset, but it wasn't as big a deal. It wasn't like Team USA losing outright to Nigeria as a 30-point favorite.
One more question on the business, and then I want to ask you a little bit about the NFL season and what happened last year with you guys in the Circa Survivor. But the TikTok, Instagram, YouTube stars that you're referencing are coming into the sports gambling space, and they're coming in a big way. They're getting hired every day, and they're getting pushed. A friend of mine has this line of the picks don't matter. Do the picks matter anymore when it comes to this stuff? When it comes to content from the books or just content in general?
No, I honestly don't think it does. And I think when you're looking for people that have large social followings, I mean, they're going to be able to drive eyeballs and traffic. And they should, again, those are people that should probably shy away from making picks. But if you're not in this every day, I don't think they understand the ramifications of making a couple of picks and go, oh, it's harmless that I made picks. Well, you know what? There may be somebody out there that's harmed by that. I mean, for someone that does what you do every day and what I do, I mean, the countless hours that go into trying to figure out what information I'm going to make public. And, hey, maybe I'm as guilty as anybody else with the game show format that we have for Fox Bet Live, that I have to bet larger amounts as we get later in the week because it's competing against two other people to try and win particular weeks that are going to culminate, in a bigger season-long contest. Whereas that's not something that I would do just because it's Friday for Sunday. I'm going to bet larger amounts. So there is a, catch-22 with a lot of this stuff. That, you're talking about folks that have never been in the gambling space that are suddenly making picks. My take is I hope they're terrible because I can just bet against them and use them as barometers and indicators to try and make a few bucks against. But I do think that, operators out there have to be cognizant of who actually is professing to be an expert and who's making picks because you can rub a lot of your constituents the wrong way.
Absolutely. All right. So last year you got one of those big old cardboard checks from Circa.
Which, by the way, doesn't fit into a sedan. So if you don't have an SUV, I have no idea how the hell you're supposed to get that home from a casino. So I have to thank our friend, Maddie, for basically bringing that thing home because I tried to shove it into my car in the garage and had no chance.
Yeah, Vegas Matty and I did a podcast for the Westgate Super Contest for 3 years together. So yeah, if you guys are looking for a proxy, he's definitely one that Todd and I would recommend wholeheartedly for either the Survivor or the Westgate Contest or the Circa Million. But 68K, you went perfect. There was a little bit of a concern or question like, does everyone who goes perfect with the Survivor, do they get $1 million? Well, no, it was broken up between everybody.
Would have been great if that was the case. Derek Stevens might not have been thrilled, and him and Mike Palm might have been a little bit unhappy. Would have been great for all the players, the 30 some odd of us that shared the total prize pool.
So did you, without giving away any secrets, did you have a philosophy going into that each week? Is there a way that you approached that? Like, how did you, I'm guessing it wasn't your first Survivor, but, to take home a perfect season like that, have you ever gone 17-0 before?
I have for a lot lesser stakes, unfortunately, but it's all about kind of mapping out the big picture. You can't go week to week and just take the approach, I'll figure it out when I get there. You have to take the full 17-week purview, kind of build out the schedule and identify, hey, look, here are the games I'm looking for. Here are the potential teams I may use. And there's no doubt injuries play a role. And to Circa's credit, I mean, Thanksgiving threw a wrench in there. I believe they've added Christmas, which will change the dynamic a little bit. But you have to have a big plan. And the one thing I think a lot of people have a hard time with as it pertains to Survivor, you have to be willing to lose early if you want to win late. And what I mean by saying that is you can't paint yourself into a corner that you're going down the stretch and all you have are the dregs of the league because, oh, well, I made it to week 13. Well, you know what? Last I checked, if you make it to week 3 or make it to week 13, you get a big fat goose egg there. So what's the difference if you go out in week 2 or you go out in week 13? You want to try and give yourself the best opportunity. And I get it. People do this for entertainment and they figure every week that, you know, they're in it gives them a chance. But in reality, for those folks that are going to be new to Survivor pools, whether it's Circa or just with their friends or an office pool, look at the full season and be willing to take chances early that are going to put you in a position to win it late.
So Circa's taken the Bucks and the Chiefs and said if you don't use them till week 17 or week 18, you get yourself into this big prize pool of $6 million, which will get broken up by people that run the table. So not only do you have Thanksgiving, you also have Christmas, which are the weeks you have to make sure you've got good teams available during those weeks. But also now you got to hang on to the Bucks and the Chiefs. How does that impact this coming season?
Yeah, the Bucks and Chiefs wrinkle is definitely interesting because the real challenge with those two teams to use the final week of the season, hey, look, those are teams with massive win totals. And, you know, they're probably going to be underdogs if things break the right way for you going into that final week of the regular season. So for me, I have to kind of map that out. I may actually go with multiple entries this time, knowing some of those wrinkles that are there. And I'll go through it. I mean, I can't take full credit for it. We shared the entry with my partner, Payne, from the Bet the Board podcast. But I will say we had one entry we weren't sure we were getting ourselves into, and that one entry paid dividends. But with some of the challenges and the creativity that they've added to the contest, it may behoove us to have a couple of entries and try some different strategies to make sure that if one goes down early, you still have the potential, and then to try and take home the whole prize pool with the Chiefs and Bucks at the end. You better hope that either Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady's out there for some meaningful football instead of betting against both those teams, which would have been profitable this year, or at least in the case of Kansas City, it would have.
I don't think I'm speaking on a turn by saying the Circa Million has been a game changer here in Las Vegas, at least. It has caused the Westgate to pretty much change everything for the way they were operating. It was $1,500. Now it's $1,000. And now they're trying to, they have much bigger payouts now, and they've got quarter pole that they're giving away now even more money. What do you see the future of those NFL and college football pick contests here in Nevada, given that other states are going to have the opportunity to have their own?
I think competition is great for the consumer. I think some of them are always going to have a little bit more cachet and prestige, but I do worry that if you're not able to run these contests across multiple states, Circa, for example, will they have a Circa Millions that's just in Colorado, or will they have a Circa Millions that just stays in Nevada? The reality of it is you're going to have people that are going to find proxies like Vegas Maddie that are going to enter in various states and try and give themselves the opportunity to collect the whole piece of the pie. So I'd like to see if it was something that could be done on a national level, or even if you just keep it to Nevada, that it creates that unique differentiating factor that allows people to, you know, have a chance to win some of these prestigious handicapping contests that take a ton of skill, but you obviously need Lady Luck smiling down upon you as well. But I think it'll be very interesting when you talk about the next 2 to 3 years, how many other operators want to try and create their unique iterations of whether it's a Survivor pool or a Pick 5 or anything else that may be out there to try and get in on the fun and see which will potentially gain the most traction and credibility and prominence amongst both professional and recreational bettors alike.
And that's the thing that I didn't get, because I was in the DraftKings contest last year. And, you know, Dan Harris, who works with BettingPros, he was the guy, he's in New Hampshire. So he was able to enter the entries every week as New Hampshire was part of it. But it was 3 states last year, and they're going to have up to 6 to 9 states this year for DraftKings. And they're the only ones who are doing it. And Johnny Avello keeps on telling me that it's totally fine and they've done all the legality of it and there's no questions. And I'm looking around going, why is nobody else doing this? Because wouldn't it make sense for other operators to use the multi-state opportunities to have a gigantic prize pool?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how some of that works. And I won't claim to be a legal expert. I mean, I know that the poker community has fought an uphill battle for a while when it comes to shared liquidity to try and make sure that you're not just a Nevada player pool, that if you're Caesars, you can incorporate New Jersey and Pennsylvania and try and get other states online. I'm not sure how sports are any different, but I will say to, a couple of the major books out there, they're smarter about, pay to play versus free contests. And I think you can get away with a little bit more of a sweepstakes component in some of the states than you can in terms of actually entering with a fee and competing that way. But you raise an excellent point, and I think that those legal teams are going to do everything they can. But the fact that every state has its own rules and regulations, I'm not quite sure how it's going to work when you have 9 states pulling into the same prize pool.
How big of an advantage how big of an advantage or a tool are stagnant lines when it comes to looking at those contests versus what the closing number will be on Sunday? Do you ever use those to help handicap as to either in the contest or on your wagers on Sunday?
Yes and no, not to impact wagers on Sunday. I'll get that out there first and foremost. Single game wagering for me is completely separate than the contest mentality and what goes into it. Now, the one good thing about the contest, even with stagnant lines, everybody has access to those numbers. So if there's an injury, you're not stealing anything. If Aaron Rodgers is ruled out and you have a chance to take the Vikings plus 6.5, meanwhile on the betting board everywhere else, the game is down to a pick 'em. If you're doing that, so are other folks in the pool. And that's where a little bit of game theory comes in. Do you want to go the other way and hope there's an upset? Do you want to avoid that game completely? And while it's not as important early on in the season, it definitely plays a role for those folks that are competing for the big prize pool. Because if you can find a game and you think the market's going to move a different way, or you think that something is inaccurately being reflected in a particular number, taking a point spread that's 3.5, 4 points worse than the number in a contest setup, can pay dividends and create a 2-game swing that can be insurmountable sometimes. When you're talking about the closing stages of these contests, trying to find separation from those other folks that are vying for some of the top prizes.
All right, let's talk about some of the games, some of the things that are going to be happening here in Vegas and across the NFL. Do you think the Raiders have a legitimate home field advantage this year with Allegiant Stadium now that fans are going to be in there?
It's a great question, and one I'm going to go in and try and utilize a baseline number for the Raiders early on, but try and get a gauge as things continue to go. From people I've talked to that have season tickets here, they're extremely excited about going and being part of it, whether they're Raiders fans or not, remains to be seen. But I do think with a fan base and such a proud tradition that they're going to be able to create a home field advantage as long as they're competitive early in the season. Otherwise, you may have folks that were excited about flying 45 minutes to 90 minutes from Oakland and Los Angeles coming out for every single game that go, you know what, we don't really care that much about playing the Broncos in, early December. We can dump our tickets to Bronco fans, and you could see a major shift. I don't think it'll be something, though, as pronounced as what we've seen in Chargers games when, they take on teams from, more popular AFC destinations, that they're more terrible towels in the stands for a Chargers home game when they were playing at the soccer stadium than what you saw in terms of actual Chargers jerseys being represented.
Are you pro or anti Derek Carr?
I think Derek Carr gets a bad rap. I think he's a more talented quarterback than he truly gets credit for. Is his decision-making the best all the time? No, probably not. And I'm definitely curious to see how Carr will perform this year behind an offensive line that, let's just say, maybe a bit iffy compared to what John Gruden and Mike Mayock have crafted in the past. I think they took some creative liberties there. So let's see if Carr's running for his life. You hope he's standing upright more often than not if the Raiders are going to be competitive.
Am I crazy to like Raiders over 6.5 for wins next year?
I won't say crazy, but for me, it's not a win total I want to tangle with one way or another. You obviously have to factor in that there still is an outside chance, although I think it diminishes by the day, that maybe Aaron Rodgers will be a member of the Broncos and it makes the Raiders the clear-cut 4th team in the division. I'm not quite sure where they're going to go to get stops on a week-in, week-out basis. And the problem that I've seen with the Raiders over the last couple of years, they start out like a house on fire, and then they completely crater over the back half of the schedule. So 6.5, I feel a fair reflection of where the Raiders are. If anything, I'm going to have to lean under there, but it's not a win total that's cracked my betting portfolio just yet.
What do you do with the Packers, and what do you do with them early? Their numbers in week 1 are available right now. What do you make with the Packers? Most likely, even if Rodgers is, their quarterback in game 1, probably he's not part of training camp. He probably walks up, a couple weeks before the year begins. How do you handle the Packers this year?
I think you wait to see where Rodgers is going to be. And I expect him at this point to be a member of the Packers. That number will take off as a result. And I think you're going to get some wiggle room to bet against them. I'm actually a little bit more bullish on the Vikings in the NFC North than some folks. And I think even with the healthy Aaron Rodgers coming back, will we see the quarterback that we saw last year who was open and said, I spent the pandemic studying the playbook, trying to break down some of my bad habits and relearn the game? Or the quarterback 2 years ago that we all thought, look, this guy's relatively washed up. His best football is behind him. I don't think we'll see one extreme or another, and he may have a chip on his shoulder and want to go out there and prove to not only the franchise and the fans and himself that he's still going to be able to repeat his MVP performance, but it's not a team that I'd be buying stock in, even if Aaron Rodgers says, I'm definitely coming back. I think you're going to have some wiggle room to bet against them early and often.
How are you on the Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger, them drafting a running back in round one, given all the holes they've got? They have 2 offensive linemen they got to replace, including Pouncey. What do you make of the Steelers this coming season?
I like the pick of Najee Harris. The problem that Najee's going to run into is you're not running behind the Alabama offensive line anymore. So going to be a little bit different when you can get 2 yards downfield, make a linebacker miss, and be off to the races. I definitely have some apprehensions about the Steelers in the trenches, specifically on the offensive side, because we know Ben's not mobile. We know that short passing game was not effective down the stretch last year as defensive backs were able to squat on it. So I think this is the swan song for Ben, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to have a fairy tale ending. I think that undefeated start last year was a little bit more smoke and mirrors and a byproduct of their schedule. So for the Steelers, as painful as it is for me to say, because I may or may not have someone that I live with who lives and dies with the Steelers every Sunday. Hopefully she's not listening right now, but I don't think the Steelers are going to flirt with a playoff berth, not in a highly competitive NFC North.
Yeah, I'm on the under 8.5 wins for the Steelers this coming season. I just don't think it's going to be. They have the hardest schedule on paper of anybody in the NFL right now, and with Roethlisberger and that offensive line,
it doesn't look good. I think early on in the season it could be a continuation of that dreadful playoff performance we saw against Cleveland.
I want to end the conversation kind of about Cleveland and others. When it comes to the public, you had a tweet the other day that was great about the fact that there's no secret sauce here. You can't just fade the public. You can't just ride the steam. You can't just have great closing line value. Everything's got to factor in. But overall, how do you feel when the public is all running one way? Did you look to bet the other way, or do you just stay away entirely?
My take on it is a little bit different. I think in the NFL, it's still a good barometer in terms of public sentiment, because it's the one sport where the public can have a little bit of say because everyone looks to try and bet it. And I think oftentimes for people, if you see, an inordinate amount of tickets coming in on one team, try and dig a little deeper into the matchup and figure out exactly what the public may be missing, why the odds makers see things one way, but the general public sees it a different way, whether it's narrative, whether it's recent performance or something else a little bit different. But I can tell you, professional bettors will be the first ones that are going to bet more ugly ducklings more often than not. And there's nothing sexy about betting against Patrick Mahomes or betting against Tom Brady when he was a member of New England, covering numbers at an alarming rate. But value is value. And if you happen to make a game 6 and the market opens 8, 8.5, whatever it may be, you have to trust your numbers and your process. The hard part is when a field goal game balloons to 10, because there's that costly turnover in the final 2 minutes with that late game variance situation. One thing I will say is we've watched the NFL go through a transformation over the last, let's call it the last 10 to 15 years. There's a lot more emphasis placed on good quarterback play, and good quarterbacks are going to make smarter decisions. So I've tried to do a little bit of avoiding the real dregs on a week in, week out basis. And I can tell you this season, if the Houston Texans go into battle without Deshaun Watson, odds makers are going to really have to inflate those price tags for me to see value in Houston, especially when they step up in class against some of the big boys in the NFL.
Come on, Tyrod Taylor can't go win football games?
Tyrod's legs are an extremely valuable asset in terms of extending plays, and I have a feeling sportsbooks are going to need him to sneak in the back door more often than not as it pertains to not just covering spreads, but maybe pulling off the occasional upset for arguably one of the worst rosters we've seen on paper. As it's constructed now, I know it's all subject to change, but the outlook does not look all that optimistic down there for Coach Culley in his debut season.
All right, Todd, last question. Do you watch games you bet?
I don't watch every game I bet. I won't just bet a game to watch it. The NFL and college football, I try and take in as much content as I possibly can. Nightly sports like the NHL, which I do a lot of work in, I won't watch every single game, but I will make sure I'm combing through box scores, studying stats. And what I try and do is if I haven't seen a team play in a little bit, especially for sports that are taking place on a nightly basis, I'll make it a priority to watch their games. But my running joke, and this may come off arrogant, is that if I've bet a game, I should know how that game is going to unfold, so I don't need to watch it. I need to watch teams that I don't have a bet on because clearly I don't have a strong enough read on where their strengths and weaknesses lie.
It's a great idea. It's a great point, and it's one that I actually learned this year betting hockey. Where
easier said than done, obviously, too. Let me say that, especially for the new bettors that are out there, it's easier said than done.
I learned it, and it worked. I mean, I realized I was betting 3 or 4 hockey games a night, and some of the games were available directly for me. I could watch it on my phone or stream it, but it wasn't available on my TV set. And I found it like I was having a lot more fun with it. Like I was cashing more tickets with it, and it was more. I don't want to say it was more relaxing, but because sweating is sweating, and that's fine. Now I'm definitely watching it, going like, okay, I'm keeping tabs on what's happening for the game. But not watching it, I didn't find myself like overly sad or missing it, going like, man, I wish I watched that game. Like if it cashed, great.
It can be a very different experience. And I think there's sometimes where it's valuable, if you're going to do this seriously, to go back and watch a game and go, hey, what did I miss here? Was it bad luck or was it a bad handicap or something like that? And I think the proliferation of some of the advanced analytics sites, especially on the hockey side, are great because you can dig into some of the numbers and go, hey, look, I won a bet I didn't deserve. I lost one I did. And I'm superstitious, which I know you're not supposed to be in this space, but when it comes to betting unders in the NHL, most of the totals I'll bet are unders. I try and do everything I can not to watch those, especially as it pertains to first period totals. When you're sitting there with an under 1.5 ticket, there's nothing more excruciating than if you want to try and nail yourself to a seat. So I'll find something else to keep myself busy. I'll check the score and hope that things worked out, especially in a positive fashion, that I can update my ledger with a win rather than a loss.
The Daily Juice listeners will know the joke I've made. It's betting unders in hockey is like getting your guts pulled out slowly. And it's just an excruciating, awful experience. It's fun, but it's excruciating to go through.
You'll have to expose your audience to more soccer matches where they're betting under 2 and there's a goal scored in the first 6 minutes and you're holding on for dear life over the next 80 some odd minutes, praying that a push becomes your best case scenario.
Do you bet soccer? Really?
I do a lot more international soccer because the summer months lend themselves to the opportunity where I'm not as booked up with some of the football responsibilities and other things that are out there. I'll watch the Premiership and some of the bigger matches in the Bundesliga, Serie A, and La Liga. But no, I don't bet a ton of European domestic soccer just because there aren't enough hours in the day where I have guys that I trust that I'll bet an occasional game here or there. But when it comes to the fall, my time is pretty much allocated to pro and college football and making sure I feel comfortable with where my NHL numbers are, going into the season. And I've updated my depth charts and all of that sort of thing. But no, it's absolutely impossible to try and keep tabs, especially with domestic competitions and the cups they play and Champions League. And so the less can be more with that. But international soccer, like the Euros that just completed in Copa, I definitely had some investments there and, was able to cash a few tickets. So take advantage of whatever's that's there.
3-way betting inside the distance, 90 minutes, extra time. I mean, it's a whole new language, man.
There are wrinkles there. And it's kind of honestly how I feel about UFC. UFC is the one mainstream sport, so to speak, that I don't do a whole heck of a lot. I'll watch the fights from time to time. But if I look at my sheet right now, and I was actually updating it before we started this podcast, I've made 2 UFC bets all year long, and I'm not quite sure that's going to necessarily change going forward.
Interesting. Wow. All right. Very good. Well, Todd, do me a favor. If folks want to listen to the podcast, want to find you on social media, where can they do so?
Follow me on Twitter. It's going to be a great bet at Todd Fuhrman. That's Fuhrman. But I tell people all the time, I'm not nearly as exciting as our podcast feed at Bet the Board Pod. And they can subscribe, download the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, you name it, it's out there. A couple of college football previews have gone live, and we'll have 2 more big conferences coming up along with 8 lovely NFL division previews. And man, before we know it, we'll be talking about week 1 of the NFL season. I don't know where the offseason goes. It feels like you blink these days and it's completely gone.
If the NBA goes to game 7, we will be approaching having like 5 days between the end of the NBA season and the start of training camp for the NFL. So yeah, it's kind of a weird year, right?
I'm going to be clamoring for the NBA and the NHL to return much more to the normalized schedule. I actually like the slight respite we get from the end of June until early August. I know that's not great for bettors because there's less of a menu that's out there. But for those of us that do this for a living, I'm sure you can speak to it. Peace of mind goes a long way. And there's nothing wrong with trying to get out of lovely Las Vegas when the mercury gets up to about 115 degrees.
Todd, thank you for the time. Really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, and best of luck with the new endeavor. I'm sure people are going to love the content you're pushing out here, not only here, but a variety of other avenues. So best of luck, Matt, and excited to see this thing grow and blossom.